It was the Auditor General's report on Oranga Tamariki, which he started the end of last year.
Yes.
So I was having a read into it. So social services reacted to a damning report of into Oranga Tamariki. And I was having a read. I was thinking, okay, cool, this all kind of makes sense. The report itself is looking more so into the Oranga Tamariki's contracting practices, so procurement contracts. It's apparently one of the largest contractors, government contractors. Their organization itself is like the biggest of all of them, which was fascinating.
Interesting.
And famously, we all know about the debacle that happened when Barnardo's was cut. Their funding was cut at the sort of, I don't know, I think it was returned to them back in like December, I think it was, when it was cut in July last year because of the government's cuts. So the reports come out, and surprise, surprise to probably no one, that Oranga Tamariki's got some issues. Quite widespread issues, that is. The sector itself has, I was reading from the PSA, PSA being the Public Service Association, who are kind of like the union for
Oh yeah, I've got their badge on right now, actually. Hold on.
public
This is my outer PSA badge.
Okay. And they put out a report, which I was trying to get a wide range of opinions. I'll get to why I'm coming back around this in a second. I had to read to what they had said about the report. Provider contracts lay bare the reckless way the government ordered cuts without regarding how children would be harmed. So their focus is about the government cuts and how that has caused a lot of the issues about contracts and procurement and things like that. Which is interesting. I was like, yeah, fair. That makes sense. You cut the service, kind of makes it a shittier service, doesn't function as well. Therefore, the people who the money is supposed to go to kind of get fucked over. That all makes sense. However, one of the people who this particular has a stake in this, Karen Shaw, because Karen Shaw is the Minister for Children.
Yep.
Now, she said, the Minister for Children said she appreciated the feedback and thoughts of the Auditor General, and that his message was clear. The way Oranga Tamariki has historically overseen, communicated, and managed contracts was poor. Historically overseen, communicated, and managed contracts was poor. I acknowledge this. It is something I have heard directly from providers across the country, both as minister and in opposition. So we're talking historic here. Shaw said progress had been made since the period covered by the report. She outlined her challenge to Oranga Tamariki when she became minister to ensure it was putting the care and protection of young people above all else when it spent money entrusted to it by taxpayers. Interesting. So, you know, she's a minister. She's a politician. She's in a position of power. I have no reason to doubt her expertise, in that she is totally not lying through her teeth, and that she is definitely saying that, she's saying this in good faith, that she's saying she appreciated the feedback, and she agrees that historically it's been pretty bad at Oranga Tamariki. So I thought, well, that's what she's saying. Then I looked at what the PSA was saying. PSA was saying, the Auditor General's report was saying that it was because of the reckless way the government ordered cuts to the agency that it had failed in this particular thing. So I went and did some digging. And instead of believing either of those two parties, with which I would probably side with the PSA, I decided to read the fucking thing myself.
Hell yeah. Reading.
But because my screen fucked up, didn't have time to outline everything. So I'm going to do my best to try and find the points that I wanted to make, because it's really interesting. So the report itself, there is a quick summary, which is really good. The report started in August 2024, I believe. The Ora, if you don't know, OT, Oranga Tamariki, Ministry for Children contracts social service providers to deliver services to children and families in need. Oh God, you guys can read it. These contracts are worth about $500 million each year. Failing to manage these contracts well might result in children and families not receiving the support they need when and where they need it. In July 2024, concerns were raised with the Office about contract management, particularly contracting decisions for 2024-2025. That is this current term, this current government. Contracts that would have started 2024 last year, July 2024 last year, or ended in July 2024 last year, or about to roll over in 2024. These services are critical for children and their families and involve significant public spending. Managing contracts poorly could significantly undermine public trust. Given this, the Auditor General decided to inquire into the concerns that had been raised. So there is a bit of an overview here, but what I really appreciate from this document or this thing is it is timelined to a T. So the report itself is looking at a very specific period, right? It's not going back to, I don't know, 2016, 17. It's literally looking at two contract periods. And I believe it's 2022, 23. And it's 20... Oh, no, hang on. There's a 23, 24, and there's a 24, 25. I wasn't sure. I couldn't see a 23, 24 anywhere.
Yeah, late 2023, I see there.
And so it's going back as far as 2022, 23. So we are talking the last 6 months of the previous, well, it's usually like the last 2 or 3 months of the previous government into when the next government came into power, which would have been October, but they didn't get their shit sorted till December, was it? And the other thing is that this report does not look at policy at all. It's just looking at the procedural stuff, what happened, what was the timeline, who said what, who had the issues, what did the contractors have to say, what did Oranga Tamariki staff have to say, all of those things. Ministers, policies, politics is kind of shoved out of it. However, policy decisions do inform what people are saying, because some of the actions and the things that led on to it were because of policy decisions. Understandably. So I had to read through it all, and there's some really interesting stuff here. So Oranga Tamariki, I'm not going to read the whole of this. I'll do my best to find the bits that fascinated me. Oranga Tamariki administers a significant budget for contracting with providers. In 2023-24, Oranga Tamariki spent about $537 million contracting with about 550 providers to deliver a broad range of services. The types of services Oranga Tamariki provides under contract are broadly care and care support, youth justice, intensive interventions, for example, family group conference coordination, transitional services, family and sexual violence services, and early support and prevention, for example, educational programs, counselling services for children and their families, and other family support. And it talks about the strategic partnerships. So it's a background generally into the kind of contracts that they have. And then they did lots of interviews with staff, providers, heard that the social sector had been concerned about procurement and contract management for many years. So if that's the case, that kind of lines up with what Karen Shaw was saying, right? And there are definitely articles that say, if you look back through, you can definitely see that there's... I don't think anyone's surprised that there's issues with Oranga Tamariki and the state system and the state care of children. But these specific things, I was trying to find out. Were they this government or the last government, and did they have anything to do with the budget cuts? That's essentially what I'm trying to get at. I had a good read through it. It was fascinating. So there's an awkward thing as well. So you've got the sort of central relationships and you've got your regional relationships. And then there's also some provisions. So Oranga Tamariki generally relied on the ability to opt out of government procurement rules for the provision of welfare services by the government. So their contract procurements are slightly more lenient, because you can't just be like, oh, you're housing 100 kids that don't have homes. Yeah, we're just going to cut your funding. Figure it out. Like, that's clearly not going to fly with anyone. So they're a little bit different, thankfully. There have been some, so there's other thing as well, as often made decisions about contracts. They made decisions about contracts later in the financial year. Providers' contracts were almost always rolled over without an open, competitive, and transparent procurement process. So, kind of, I imagine this is about like long-standing things, and like it's Bernardo's, right? They were the ones who got famously cut, and they were like, "What the fuck? What are you doing?" Which I think many of us can be like, yeah, they're doing good work. They're doing it for a long, long time. They think it's okay to give them our money. Some providers had held contracts with Oranga Tamariki and its predecessors for many years without any formal testing of the market, which, there are reasons to maybe perhaps do that, but, maybe just don't cut the funding straight away. Let's see if I can find the bit that I was looking at. Providers told us they have relationships with that their relationships with Oranga Tamariki regional staff responsible for contract management were the main strength of its contract management practice. Regional staff. We were told that interactions with these staff were, on the whole, professional, constructive, and respectful. Oranga Tamariki also generally saw these relationships as a strength, although some staff at national office said that close relationships could make it difficult for regional staffs to be part of decisions that might negatively affect providers. Both Oranga Tamariki and providers highlighted events in 2022-23 as important context for the 2024-25 contracting round. So we are talking previous government. In the 2022-23 contracting round, Oranga Tamariki sought to reduce its spending on contracts by about 20 million. Oranga Tamariki had documented lessons from this contracting round, including that the process was difficult for staff and placed a strain on relationships between regional staff and providers. Consistent key messages and clear processes would have helped frontline staff to explain why the funding changes were needed, and the tension in relationships with providers prevented a clearer focus on the strategy Oranga Tamariki wanted to pursue and affected the exercise's effectiveness. So we are talking 2022-23 contracting round, which is the last year-ish. No, hang on. When did they come into power? Yeah. So we're talking July 2022.
Yeah.
We are talking previous government. So
yeah, previous administration.
Then they made commitments to improve. Then Deloitte also got involved. They were doing its own review of its social services procurement operating model. During our inquiry, staff were unclear about the status of the work to implement Deloitte's recommendations. Oranga Tamariki, this is where we get into the meat. The bones, the meats, the bones. Oranga Tamariki told us in late 2023, it was forecasting that the 2023-24 spending would go over budget and it was at risk of breaching its appropriations. So that's late 2023, new government. OT had set a budget envelope of 490 million for contracted services in 23-24. This was based on the previous year's 537 million spending, less savings from the 22-23 line-by-line review, and a reduction to provide funding for Oranga Tamariki's enabling communities prototypes. However, in September 2023, right around the election time, finance team identified that 537 million had been committed to in contracts, including 27.9 million of contracts that had been entered into without an identified funding source. Although the finance team identified 22.5 million in one-off funding to add to the budget. So this still left potential overspending of more than 24 million. They also received an additional... so this is another thing that's interesting as well, and that kind of lines up everything. Oranga Tamariki also received an additional 40 million for 23-24 to provide for social sector pay equity funding. So they were kind of also part of distributing the pay equity funding.
Yes.
To those that had fortunately got through the door in time. I don't fucking know. Fucking pay equity bullshit. Fuck you, Nicola Willis.
Well, I mean, one thing that I was just finding curious, I was like, 537 million, right? They're saying that's
Mm-hmm.
what's too much. Is that how I'm
Yep.
understanding it? That was
So the previous year was 537 million.
yeah.
Um, um, Lease savings from live balance review.
Oh, right, yeah.
Identified that 537 million have been bid into 2027.
I mean, regardless of whether they're saying it's too much or not. Okay, 537 million is 18.52% of 2.9 billion. Not a lot of
Indeed.
money when you think about it like that.
It's not a whole, no, it's
It's
really
a
not a whole lot of money.
drop in the fucking bucket.
Then there was a task force that was set up. The task force was basically there just to scrutinize and figure out what the fuck's going on. The task force was set up in August 2023, right around the election time. Election's usually October, right?
Yeah, October, November. Yeah.
We're heading into this is still previous government, very much still previous government. So a lot of this was happening in the previous government. But what you might see is that some things might have been exacerbated, very much so.
Well, actually, no, I don't know if exacerbate is the right word, but maybe catastrophize, because it feels like that's what this government's done about anything that's going to help people.
So essentially, the task force. This is OT's Doge.
Oh no.
Task force advised that it had identified opportunities to reduce the amount Oranga Tamariki spent on contracted services by up to about $50 million in 24 and 25 and later years, in part by removing or reducing unused or underutilized services. Task force told Te Reu that it had reviewed a selection of programs and provided Te Reu an assessment of the available evidence about the effectiveness of these programs, noting that there was varying quality of evidence. The task force was also provided a risk assessment for different saving options and implementation timeframes. So, typical, type stuff. Processes. So there were some changes to processes. Around this time, Oranga Tamariki staff had formed a narrative that some providers had done well. So this is fascinating. Some providers had done well from Oranga Tamariki funding and were not providing services. We understand that Oranga Tamariki intended to review its pricing model and individual provider funding, but this did not happen. Oranga Tamariki told us that after looking at providers' financial information on the Charities Commission website and providers' utilization data, it formed a view about whether some or all of the money held in providers' reserves had come from funding that was meant for contracted services. However, as we mentioned in paragraph 6, Tamariki did not test these assumptions directly with providers. They essentially went onto the charities register, which, if you're a charity, you have to put your annual reports and your annual filing, everything. You have to put every donation, everything has to go up on there. They basically just went there and went, oh, fuck, they got money. Oh, this can't be right. Nah, look, they got 6 million in the bank. They don't need us. What the fuck's going? Like, that's not. It's not how it works.
Well, okay, I'm sorry, but so you're telling me that when a business makes $1 million per day in profit, that's a good thing, but when a service that is meant for like the wider community and everyone to benefit from, all of a sudden, that's too much money? HIPAA fucking critical, if you ask me.
Yeah. Just someone mentions it, I think, later in this, why that's so fucking dumb, but that is so fucking dumb.
Oh, I don't know, man. I see Māori partnerships. That's the problem. It's those bloody Marys again. They fucking want everything, man.
Okay, so Te Reu said the timeframes for making the changes to processes were challenging, and their early engagement with providers and partners was crucial. So this is also part of the Te Reu. Wait, who is Te Reu? Task force reported to an internal subcommittee. Task force in the NT. Okay. And then the task force was just established in 2023. Here we go. Perfect. On 27th of November 2023, a new government was sworn in. The incoming government made 2 significant policy decisions that were relevant to this inquiry. This inquiry did not start till last year, but 2 policy decisions that were relevant to this inquiry. These were about the strategic focus for Oranga Tamariki and the need to achieve savings. Oranga Tamariki told us that it received a clear direction from the Minister for Children, Karen Shaw, that Oranga Tamariki needed to focus on its core purpose. Staff told us that they understood this to mean that Oranga Tamariki should focus on the about 4,000 Tamariki for whom it has statutory care responsibilities. These are the kids in state care, right? This is the kids in state care.
Yeah.
Yeah. For whom it has statutory care responsibilities. Oranga Tamariki told us that its strategic direction involved a strong emphasis on maintaining family violence and sexual violence services for Tamariki. In response to our draft report, the minister told us that the direction provided for contracted services was not about achieving a savings target, but about ensuring that the services funded by Oranga Tamariki were delivering outcomes sought, that the services were connected to its core business, and that there was not duplication of services.
Makes
Sounds
sense.
good, but that's not what we heard. It was all about budget cuts. In December 2023, the Treasury issued guidance for departments that provided an overview of the budget 2024 process and how to submit budget initiatives. The guidance said that the Cabinet had agreed to a baseline savings target of 6.5% for most agencies and 7.5% for agencies with more than a 50% increase in full-time equivalent staff since 1718. Oranga Tamariki was required to meet the 6.5 baseline savings target. This is fascinating. 1, I didn't realise that's how you do billions. When you're talking about millions. I have never seen it like this before.
That's a small number. Tiny.
Or am I wrong?
No, that's just millions.
Can someone... No. It's 1,584 millions.
Oh, wait.
Which
what?
is 1.5 billion? Can someone please dumb it
I'm
down,
not
please?
here to do... You guys always try to make me fucking do math. I swear to God, every week someone tries to make me do math.
Billion is 1,000
Oh,
million.
okay, yeah, no,
okay.
see...
Yes, thank you. Okay, I am
Yeah.
correct. Yes, yeah.
Don't ask me, I'm not the math guy. That's not my
That's what I was thinking. I was like, why didn't they just put billion? But there's probably a reason. It's probably a financial thing. Anyways, so we're talking $1.5 billion for Oranga Tamariki. That's insane money. So they were chopping off a little bit, but still 1.5 billion. Damn, that's a lot of money. Damn.
I guess it's probably not that much money when you consider how many kids it is versus how many landlords probably get 2.9 billion.
I mean, it's a substantial budget, but compared to these numbers we're looking at, 500 million, it's yeah. Anyway, fascinating. Anyway, no, we've all learned something today. We know
that I can't tell numbers.
So it was going to do it through organizational restructure and its contracted services budget, including recovering funds from providers and reducing contracted services and beyond. The organizational restructure ran in parallel to the 24-25 contracting round and was finalized in July 2024. The new structure changed how the teams responsible for contracting were resourced and structured. Oranga Tamariki told us the restructure reduced the number of staff working on contract development and management by about 50%. It affected staff included contract managers in the regional offices. We discussed the impact of this. So, plain, simple, clear, pretty much, that the issues that we saw July 2024 last year were because of the government's push to cut.
What a surprise.
In order to meet their budget targets. So essentially, they fucked up all the contracts because they had to do a restructure because the government wanted to cut their funding, or they were cutting their budget. And by the time that restructure was in place, it lined up. Contracting round was ran in parallel with the contracting round, and contracts were supposed to end in July 2024. So the people, the back office staff, yep, the people who are in charge of making sure the contracts are delivered and the money gets delivered to the organizations that Oranga Tamariki contracts the work out to make sure that kids, families are all safe and well. They all line up. It all got fucked up with the same thing. This all comes back to the fact that the budget the government cut the budget. And the staff they needed.
So that means that women and children in state care have helped fund landlord cuts. Also, someone else pointed out, softening up for selling of the management of the service for more cost, privatization. So fuck the minorities, help us pay our bros who have more than enough money while we make an excuse to help our bros even more. Love it for us.
I don't think I got too much further than this, but I think you're starting to get the picture essentially. So there's this thing called reconciliations as well, and someone can definitely, and only because I've read this recently, someone can fix me up if I'm wrong. If you haven't used the money, they can take back some of the money that you may have underspent. But there is a practice that, especially for long-term funders, that if so they may have, one contractor may have two contracts, right? One contractor, one overarching contractor, have two contracts. One goes to this service that they provide, the other money goes to this service that they provide. If they underspent here, they could use that extra that they can spend on this one. And Oranga Tamariki generally had another thing of like, that's fine. Or if they overspent here, then they would kind of jimmy it up with this one and they'd kind of make ends meet. That was kind of a common practice because, a lot of these are long-term contract that they've been in business. And the reconciliation process is business as usual. But perhaps they didn't, so the email that was sent out, supposedly this didn't communicate it correctly and it freaked everyone out who was on a contract. So it is also important, so this is the email that was sent out from the Deputy Chief Directive. It's also important to let you know that we have initiated the annual reconciliation process. If you have an identified underutilization, my team will be in touch to confirm with you this with you and to discuss full recovery. So that's a normal process, but considering the timing of all this, it didn't go down well. March 2024, Oranga Tamariki briefed the minister about its planned reconciliation process and its communication plan. The briefing said Oranga Tamariki carried out reconciliation every year, but that its contractual terms meant that it could not always recover the full amount. Oranga Tamariki indicated that it was looking to strengthen these terms in the future, that it would seek full recovery wherever possible now, and that providers may view this as a reduction in funding and frontline services. Oranga Tamariki said internally that, to the minister that it would seek to recover as much funding as possible between utilisation and the full amount funded. Once Oranga Tamariki agreed an amount with the provider, it recovered the funds by deducting them from its payments to the provider in the fourth quarter. National Office led reconciliation discussions with the top 35 largest providers. This later increased to 44 providers after requests for additional support from regional offices. Oranga Tamariki staff and providers described difficult meetings trying to agree on the amounts to be recovered. We were told the meetings were particularly difficult when Oranga Tamariki suggested that a provider's reserves indicated that it had not spent money on providing services for Oranga Tamariki. You got too much in the bank because we saw it on the charities register. What's that $6 million doing in your account? It's fascinating stuff. So, staff also indicated that the concurrent restructure resulted in the loss of regional staff, loss of backroom staff, whose in-depth knowledge to providers would have helped with this process. Providers echoed these sentiments, and several told us that they felt that some staff that they dealt with had a poor understanding of their services and associated costs. So, staff, OT staff, that the concurrent restructure resulted in the loss of regional staff. Providers who lacked the knowledge. Providers echoed these sentiments and told that they said some staff they had dealt with had poor understanding of their services and associated costs. So basically, you got rid of the people with the most knowledge and you put a bunch of cheap people, or you overworked a bunch of people that were already in the service, and it fucked everything over.
Mm-hmm.
The ball rolled. He also reiterated that some regional staff no longer had the same direction as they had previously had, for example, to allow funding to be redistributed from under-delivered services so that the same provider over-delivered. Oranga Tamariki staff and providers told us that despite statements about reconciliation and the recovery of funding, being a business-as-usual process, it was clear that it was taking a starkly different approach to that taken in previous years. This is the current government. So this business-as-usual process was taking a starkly different approach to that taken in previous years. Staff and providers told us that Oranga Tamariki had not carried out reconciliation in a consistent or disciplined way for many years. We're going back about that. That's good. For example, we heard that previously Oranga Tamariki had not necessarily hang on. It promised that Oranga Tamariki had not carried out reconciliation in a consistent way for many years. Okay. Had not necessarily expected providers to reach 100% of all their agreed deliverables to retain all of their funding. Often took an overall view of service provision. For example, if a provider reported underutilization of one service line but overutilization of another service line, funded service, Oranga Tamariki generally allowed funding to be redistributed and did not seek to recover funding for the underutilized services. So that's what I was saying before. Got two buckets. They might take some from this one, put into this one. They did not seek to recover any funding from providers during periods of the COVID-19 pandemic and had a variety of contractual terms that often required providers to report little, if any, of their financial information and use of funding. So pretty lenient. I'm kind of not mad about some of these, though. We're talking about services that provide for children. And probably the people who are the most vulnerable in society. We literally in there, core services, domestic violence, sexual violence, vulnerable children and families, right? I personally, as a taxpayer, although pretty low taxpayer, I don't care if they take more than what they're like. I don't care. It's what? A couple million, maybe, if that. Maybe it's probably more like 100,000 here and there. Yeah, divided between 5 million New Zealanders. It's pennies. I don't care. Put it to good use. If this is a provider that's providing these services, I'm sure that money will go to a good place.
Right? Yeah, and I guess if they want there to be more, paperwork and proof on that side, what's that going to cost? More backroom workers who can process the paperwork. They don't want to pay for that. They've already told us they don't want to pay for that. And then, in cases like this, I would rather Oranga Tamariki have funding that it needs without having to justify why these people who are often in extremely traumatic and horrific circumstances. I don't care if there isn't as much paperwork there. I want paperwork, say, when it comes to housing and infrastructure and things that could actually impact a bunch of people. But yeah, this just feels like a typical thing, though, where they go, oh, these things that we're giving out for free, we've got to make sure that not a single penny of it is being misused or technically taken. although the fact that we ignore all of this tax evasion and all of these other things, that's fine. But maybe some people who are trying to help children in horrific circumstances, or what, they might get a few extra bucks that they're probably also just spending on helping these kids. Like, it's such a fucking straw man.
There's only a wee bit more to go because I didn't get much further than this, to be honest. But what I did read, I was fascinated by some of this. It was great. The approach to reconciliation placed an immediate strain on providers who had planned their finances and those who use. So we've heard about this in the news. That's what made it to the news, is that a lot of providers were like, "What the fuck is going on?" The funding they received would do things like the cost of their staff contracts, property leases, and other running costs. Some providers disputed the amounts Oranga Tamariki sought to recover because they looked it up on the charities register, and its assumptions that their reserves derived from unspent Oranga Tamariki funding. For example, one large provider told us that Oranga Tamariki sought to recover hundreds of thousands of dollars despite issues that the provider raised. These included that the provider forecast that it would achieve, so the provider forecast that it would achieve 100% utilization for one affected service by the type by the end of 23-24, so the end of the contract. The information held by Oranga Tamariki about the provider's delivery and costs was inconsistent with the information that the provider held themselves. Another large provider said that Oranga Tamariki told them that as part of contract negotiations, it wanted to review their substantial reserves and how Oranga Tamariki would reinvest these funds. The provider's response to Oranga Tamariki noted that its service revenue from the contract with Oranga Tamariki was managed separately to its other finances. The provider also emphasized that its reserves had come from many years of good financial management. What? Oh, well, no wonder they looked at it sideways, guys. They wouldn't know fiscal responsibility if it slapped them in the face. Including asset management investment, and that it needed its reserves to operate safely in case of changes in funding. That's it. That's it for me. Mm-hmm. I don't care how much they got in the bank, because yes, if they're running these services, and I know this firsthand, actually, I know this firsthand because I did work for a charity, and that charity was able to survive on its own because it was run by a social enterprise. The social enterprise basically paid for the charity side of work, the charity work, the work that doesn't pay, the social service, right? And the only reason that they were able to be where they were and able to survive as long as they had and go through the pandemic was because they were propped up by the business arm. And they did not rely on the government every round of funding who would say, yes, no, we're going to give you 10 million less, we're going to give you 5 million more. Like, that's what fucked over so many of the charities that we worked alongside, because they just couldn't run. They didn't know whether or not they could run in 6 months. They couldn't invest in staff. Whereas the charity I worked for, we were sitting pretty because we knew we've got money in the bank. We've got assets we've been able to buy because we've been fiscally good and successful. Therefore, and like, they were very transparent. They're like, here's our running costs. Here's what staff costs. This is how much the charity is. And it was pretty balanced out. It was only after the pandemic that things started to go profit, which wasn't profit. It was savings that were then reinvested back into the charity work. But this is exactly it. This is why. It's because if you try and run purely on government contracts, every time it's a right-wing government, you get fucked and you can't run your service anymore.
Well, that's the thing, though. I mean, as Dr. Payenda has said too, though, is that the more we also funnel public money into private contracting, the more it's costing us. It's almost like we'd be better off having a socialized version of this that was just available and a lot better run. Like, could you imagine if we actually had services that would help with those wraparound things for Oranga Tamariki? I mean, Oranga Tamariki are doing not just social work, they're helping with psychological issues, mental health, family dynamics, like a plethora of confounding factors that just could be helped if we actually had socialized services that were well funded. I don't know, kind of like we've seen in some budgets from some parties that they have the same color as my hair almost, you know. Fucking surprise.
So this is only part 3. There are 6 or 7 parts to it. There are 7 parts to it. So it's honestly, it's actually really easy reading because it's like chunks at a time, and I blew through it quite fast. But almost like everything I read was was fascinating. I'll get to the end of this, and then I'll let you guys do anything else. So just these are the parts that were just like, well, this is fascinating. So some had to hold certain reserves to meet the social services accreditation standards. And then OT updated the minister on the 7th of June 2024. This is right before the contracts were about to be renewed, saying it was close to finalising the reconciliation process and that providers had been sensitive to this process and had needed greater transparency. Oranga Tamariki said the process was resource intensive, and that this had delayed the 2024-25 contracting process, which is what broke the news, or what broke into the news. Then there was a reconciliation process. Some of them managed to rebut it. Right. The delays in completing the reconciliation process meant that the process began to overlap with discussions about contracts for the following, so 2024-25, July last year. Staff told us that reconciliation and discussing new or varied contracts with providers would usually have been separate processes. However, the process merged in 2024 because of the different approach to reconciliation, the time it took to receive the data needed for this, and difficulty agreeing with providers the amounts to be recovered. As a result, there was no clear air between the processes. This contributed to a lack of timely communication, delayed decision-making, and ultimately damaged relationships between Oranga Tamariki and providers. So, I don't know if I've got it through to you guys. And tell me if you got a different story from that. The fuck-ups were because of the budget cuts.
Yeah.
Yeah?
I mean, as Craig Rennie likes to point out, where does the money come from? Where does the money come from? Comes out of money that was maybe promised and on the way to being given to women and their equity. Like, I actually know someone who was almost at the end of their equity claim. They had done so much work, and all of that has been just completely fucking wasted. Which, should we add this to the total amount that this government's wasting? Someone needs to start a debt calculator. Can y'all start a debt calculator on all of the borrowing and stealing they're doing from other areas to kind of add to their overall fiscal hole? Because it's getting pretty big.
So at the end of the day, is Karen Shaw correct? She appreciated the feedback, and the way Oranga Tamariki has historically overseen, communicated, and managed contracts was poor. I acknowledge this. It is something I have heard directly from providers across the country, both as minister and in opposition. Shaw said progress had been made since the period covered by the report. She outlined her challenge to Oranga Tamariki when she became minister to ensure it was putting the care and protection of young people above all else when it spent money entrusted to it by taxpayers. Did OT do that? Did they meet that obligation? Oh, you're muted. You're muted. You're muted. Muted.
Would it have mattered? If they needed to save the money somewhere, would it have mattered? Because it seems like they have to save a bunch of money, except for when it comes to the military, because if we need it, we'll find it. Fuck kids who are in state care and who are going through some horrific life-altering things. But sure, just give money to landlords and military and fuck them, I guess.
I'm going to have to read the rest of this because I'm just looking at some of the headlines and I'm like, shit, this is fascinating stuff. I hope you found that somewhat fascinating, but will anything happen of this report? No, nothing will happen. It'll basically be another reason to go, why are we paying OT so much money? Why are they getting so much of our taxpayer money? They're just fucking it up. It's not even going to the kids. They don't even know how to deal with contracts or procurement. When the reason this all blew up was, sure, they had people in there, or they had processes that were not great when it came to contracts, and they were dealing with so many fucking contracts. And so much money was going through their doors and out to contract providers. So it makes sense that you might need an extra couple of staff members in the regional offices and maybe national office. Those backroom staffers that you got rid of, you might need them. But hey, no, let's just cut them because they're a waste of money. So we're going to cut them, which means OT is not going to work. If OT doesn't work, we shouldn't be funding them as much, should we? Should we just cut their funding even more?
That they're a waste of money. They're saying that those jobs don't mean as much as other jobs out there. That's like Christopher thinks you should go work at Macca's, but fuck the back rooms. They do nothing. They sit on their ass. Like, it's just this weird way to, like, devalue valuable roles in society. The same way we need fucking people at the supermarkets. We need to see people at the fucking petrol station, unfortunately. You know, there's so many things we need people for, but then we try to devalue their jobs like they don't mean something. All of these jobs matter because if they didn't, we'd complain that we didn't have supermarkets open super late or things being shipped up and down the country 24/7 because our truck drivers are driving 24/7. It's really shit to see the way that they're just throwing these small little things in there that are very just undermining to the value that these things hold in our society. Like the same way they framed, what was it? Women librarian to some, I don't know, bigger, more important job or whatever the fuck. Like, there's so many small things they're adding in the language that's just very telling.
My suggestion to you guys, if you want to get even more infuriated, I just started reading part 6. oag.parliament.nz, or if you look up Oranga Tamariki, in fact, I think the easiest way I find it was just going to RNZ and find the Social Services React to Damning report. I think it's actually this article. Auditor General releases scathing report. Find this article here. Find this, and it says a report released. Find that, and then you get to here. And then you can read through the whole 6 parts here. I was just reading through just these 2 bits. But there is some interesting headlines that I just read there. Oranga Tamariki did not consistently demonstrate a culture of integrity, transparency, and accountability. So go have a read. Find out more about this. But from what I can see, the budget cuts did not make this any better. And in fact, if anything, we probably shouldn't have cut the backroom staff that may have not ended up in kids not getting their funding, or providers who provide for children not getting their funding.
Well, yeah, actually, one of the things I didn't realize, there was a comment here that was earlier saying, does anyone know where the Bernardo's Kids Helpline, What's Up? I didn't realize What's Up was from Bernardo's, because I remember having to use that hotline as a young person. And I did check, it is still running, it's still operating. So for now, it is still operating.
Only because they kicked up a stink and they're a big enough name that they made it to national news and went, what the fuck? So they were the ones that sort of broke the back a little bit. What happened, as you can see the timeline, is that you got to July 2024. There was a kerfuffle between the contracts. They were doing reconciliation for the previous years. That was all muddled up because they decided to go super fucking hard on it, but they got rid of the people who actually had the knowledge to do the reconciliations. The new contracts were up in 2024-25. They were purely looking at it from a monetary budget standpoint, as far as I understand. And they just went, cut. You guys don't have enough evidence. We don't understand. We haven't even got to that part. So you guys we don't know what's going on. So you're not getting any funding. We can't promise you any funding, which is probably a good number of those contracts. Bernardo's was one of them. It wouldn't surprise me if the big name that they were talking about that I read out there that had good money in reserves, I wouldn't be surprised if it was someone like Bernardo's or it was them themselves that said, what the fuck? Yeah. So Bernardo's were like, hey, OT aren't going to fund what's up. So we don't know what to do. We can't fund it ourselves. It's gone. It made news. Karen Chahor went, oh no, not Bernardo's. Oh no, these people. Like, oh, we couldn't possibly have that. OT, calm down. It's all your fault. What are you doing? OT, and then she gave them the funding. And it's like, never would have happened if your fucking finance minister didn't say go find 6% fucking savings. So yeah, it's all connected. It all comes back to motherfucking austerity.
Yay!